Call the meeting to order. I will just say that thing, this is a new procedure with Zoom and so forth, and so anyone that has to go technological here, yeah, no, need to continue on whether the technology is working or not. So yes. Can we have a motion to approve the minutes of May 15th, 2023? I'll make a motion to approve. Okay.
I wasn't at that meeting, so.
Okay, well, that's true, actually. I guess I jumped the gun a little bit there. Do you have any discussion?
I really not everything's pretty good. It was a rather lengthy
It was.
meeting. I spent some time spent, so
Yeah. Or,
No, I'm good. I read through them. They all seem fun.
okay. All right. So do we have a second for?
Go ahead and second it.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And we also have the minutes from June 19, which is a little bit less of a meeting. This is my first meeting.
Sure.
Those minutes?
Yeah, I'm gonna approve the June 19th.
They go on second. Oh, that's funny because you're meeting when June 19th. Yeah, that's the first meeting that I did. It wasn't
You sure? I think there's something on there.
yeah, you had to vote me in.
oh, okay.
There was
That was the one
discussion.
that was different.
You're
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
in the notes, so I know you were
Oh,
there.
okay.
Yeah.
I'll say
Okay, cool.
it was a little after.
Any discussion of the minutes? For the other people?
You don't have any comments?
Okay. Matt, no.
No.
All right. I'll call the question in. All those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. There we go. So that brings us to the next thing, which is public input. The public is invited to present petitions, make announcements, or provide other information to the Planning Commission that is relevant to the scope of the authority of the City of Blue Lake that is not on the agenda. The Planning Commission may provide up to 15 minutes for this public input session. To assure that each individual presentation is heard, the Planning Commission may uniformly impose time limitations of 3 minutes to each individual presentation. The public will be given the opportunity to address items that are on the agenda at the time of the Planning Commission, the Planning Commission takes up each specific agenda. I have any public testimony? Oh, yes.
Hi, guys, welcome, and community. Thank you for coming to the call. I really appreciate that. From the top floor, and with members of civil, um, we can really for that, and the option that we can do say recordings of our meetings and record them. It's a really simple thing to do, and that's always a great thing. I really wanted to commend our planning commission for listening to the public at our last planning commission meeting. I know the last time, but we really appreciate the time to facilitate the town hall for everything that we had concerns about concerning the housing element and other stuff, especially like the general plan upgrade and master plan. However, that wasn't really like the structure in that town hall. So we keep looking towards that and always looking towards making sure that structure is more than sufficient to always do anything as we move forward in the future. And again, I just really appreciate everything you in attendance and allowing me to share. And you guys want to ask me for the time. You love me so much. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. We have a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So make that.
All right,
I'll second.
thank you. Discussion? Add questions? Okay. I'll call for the question. All those in favor of approving tonight's agenda?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. And off we go. So number 4, action public hearing. Application 025-161-16/2023. Conditional use permit site plan approval for Thompson Gas LLC to locate a 30,000 gallon propane tank on APN 025-161-016 in the Powers Creek District on the property containing B&B portable toilets, Six Rivers portable toilets, and Johnson's mobile rentals. The tank will be used to fill up transport trucks that would deliver propane to residential and commercial customers in the area. Other activity at the site related to this business is proposed to include the parking of vehicles, trucks, use of a storage container for the storage of materials and supplies, and the storage of up to 50 empty propane tanks ranging in size from 120 to 500 gallons. This project is found be exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, per 15303 Class 3, exempting projects consisting construction and location of limited numbers of new small facilities or structures, and 15332 exempting projects characterized as infill development that meet certain criteria. All right, you ready?
Sure.
Okay.
So I'd just like to start out with what the recommendation is or the process for this item. So we're recommending that you receive presentation. Second, that you receive a presentation from the applicant. We have a PowerPoint presentation queued up from them. They'd like to go through. That you go public hearing and receive public testimony. Close the public hearing. Discuss the application, ask questions of the city staff and the applicant, and then take action on the application. Regarding public comments, I will call to your attention that there was a letter received, or an email, I should say, from Mr. Slotsky that was in your packet. Additional comments from Mr. Slotsky to receive this afternoon that presented to you tonight. You have in front of you, you sat in your spots tonight. So I'm just going to kind of run through the application. You've already generally described what they're proposing, so I can bring the site plan up and just kind of point a few things out. I think the applicant will be providing some of that information as well. Mention a little bit about CEQA, a little background about the site, what comments departments, of course, general plan, zoning code consistency, and then ultimately what your options are for action on this item this evening. Well, without trying to get things. So it's currently owned and operated by the folks that B&B Portable Toilets. I think JMR Rentals and Six River. So many of you may have seen their operation when you walk on the levee or you've driven by on Taylor Way. They have a toilet business, that fence, things like that. They put in some buildings there in recent years. In the past, this site was also used for industrial type use. I think there was J&S Steaks was there, custom stump grinders, and round stock, like a Dow milling company. So it's historically been. So why don't I bring up the site plans? Let's talk a little about what these guys are proposing. So here's the site plan there. I won't show you site stuff. Is there other than the in and out of the site through that entrance exit for Taylor Way? But they're using this area down here. This is an area here. So, let's see, a 30,000 gallon propane tank that we propose in local propane storage. Little loading area for the bobtail truck. We've got some vehicle parking, you got a storage container, fenced in area for propane tanks. That's about it. So they're proposing to rent a part of the site to have a storage tank, 30,000 gallon storage tank, fill up and distribute propane throughout the area. So point out, and I think the applicant will do so as well, is that they're currently serving this area already. The issue is their storage tank is in Mendocino County. So they're having to drive relatively far down there and come all the way back up here to serve clients of it. So having a tank in this area would just make a lot more sense for a lot of reasons. And I think this may, they could talk more about this, be kind of an interim measure for them. It's a 5-year lease with the property owner. We're also recommending a 5-year finite permit term as well. And ultimately, I think they intend to develop a facility in the area. So that's kind of their long-term plan. So this is kind of the interim solution, not drive so far to fill up their trucks. So that will significantly reduce, vehicle miles traveled, emissions, all that kind of stuff relative to existing bank condition environments. So, you had mentioned the environmental review. Many of the past uses have been permitted and allowed in the industrial park and business park, Powers Creek District. We've used such as Section 15.303, which is limited numbers of new small facilities or structures. What they're proposing falls on the threshold. And also, you find that the information as to it's applicable applies to that are outlined in the staff report. It's consistent with general plan and zoning. That occurs in city limits, which it does on a site no more than 5 acres. That's all true. Substantially surrounded by urban type uses. These are industrial uses. It qualifies for that. Site has no habitat for rare, threatened, endangered species, as you can see from the aerial photo I showed earlier. Not a lot of habitat on this site. It's pretty limited operation. I mean, you may have seen in their application and the staff report, the traffic wouldn't be very much. There wouldn't be that many employees there, so it's relatively limited. So the idea that there would be significant traffic noise or water quality impacts is just not really a concern. And the site is already served by all required public utilities and services. So for those reasons, we believe that this project qualifies for those 2 exemptions, the Class 3 and the Class 32 under CEQA. So moving on, as we typically do, I've sent out referrals for this and got comments back from Public Works, comments back from the fire department, and comments back from the city engineer. And these were pretty standard comments. Public Works was mostly concerned about there being protective structure around the tank, like bollards. So the applicant responded and provided some drawings that showed what their plan was for putting those type of structures around the tank. And then city engineer primarily commented that they needed sand. Okay, slab. It's protective structure. So all of these comments, some of them were addressed by the applicant in revised submittals. Those that weren't, because it's maybe not the appropriate time, like they don't need to prepare construction plans. As part of the building permit process, we would verify compliance with any of those conditions of approval. Now, as far as general plan and zoning code consistency, so this is the mixed use general plan designation, and the zoning is opportunity. And as you can read in the staff reports, this type of use isn't like specifically listed as a principally or conditionally permitted use in the opportunity zone. But that zone does allow people to propose things that aren't specifically listed, and that's exactly what they're doing. There's a section in there that basically says other uses and provides some findings and criteria for approving these type of things. But as far as what's in the staff report regarding general plan compliance, we note a couple things. One that, this This designation mixed use is intended to allow a mixture of use types, and that does include heavier commercial type uses, distribution, warehousing, that type of thing. Also, I mean, when you look at the existing condition of this area, it's industrial in nature. You've got a large propane tank on the adjacent property. You've got industrial activity or buildings surrounding it. So in some ways, it could be found to kind of be consistent with the existing condition there. And as we know, and it states in the staff report, this area was just rezoned in 2021 to opportunity. So you have a lot of uses down there that were essentially capped at what they're allowed to do when they can't really expand. So anyway, all in all, this is similar to some of the uses that are already down there with the finite permit term. Obviously, that allows the planning commission, the city, to reevaluate after a 5-year period to see if this is still considered to be consistent with what's going on down in that district, because it is planned for mixed uses, primarily kind of residential and commercial and some manufacturing. In the staff report, I identify some of the goals and policies in the general plan that relate to allowing mixed uses and allowing things with a use permit that aren't specifically listed as allowable uses. Because when you create zones, it's hard to always identify every single thing that somebody could want to do down there, and that's why we have that catch-all allowance with the use permit. So I mentioned earlier that they're proposing the CUP under other uses, and that has its own findings in addition to the normal findings for a conditional use permit. So the normal findings are things like the proposed location of conditional use is similar to and compatible with the uses permitted in the zone, is consistent with the purpose of the zone in which the site is located. It's one of them. The other one is that the proposed location of conditional use and the conditions under which it would be operated or maintained will not be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare, or material injurious to properties or improvements in the vicinity. So those are kind of your standard conditional use permit findings. Specific to the opportunity zone and to allowing uses that are not specifically listed, the findings are the use is consistent with the intent of the zone, and the use will not constitute a nuisance or be detrimental to the district or surrounding land uses. Pretty similar to the standard findings that are required for a CUP. So in addition to reviewing a CUP, you're also looking at site plan approval tonight. And that's why the site plan for how they're proposing to use the site or that portion of the site is important. And in the staff report, the principles to be followed for site plan approval are listed. As far as the development standards that are applicable, the staff report goes through the various development standards, whether it be building coverage, setbacks, off-street parking, all those various things. And as you'll see in there, staff is finding that the project is consistent with the applicable development standards. One of them that is interesting is parking. Our parking rules don't really specifically list this type of use or parking ratios for this type of use. And in cases like that, we typically try and assess what's appropriate for the use. These guys propose a certain number of parking spaces on this site that would have enough spaces for employees and their service vehicles and bobtails and things like that. So because of that, we find that the parking is sufficient for the proposed use. So that really kind of wraps up most of the staff report. So I'd like to just call your attention the options for Planning Commission action. Now, in the past, we usually provided a recommendation. We're more moving towards just outlining your options and providing you a resolution that contains the findings for approval if that's what you so choose to do. But as far as the findings, the options for action, first would be to determine that the findings can be made for approval of the project. And the resolution number 3, 2023, again, contains those findings. Another option is denial. You could determine that one or more of the necessary findings for approval of the project cannot be made, but you'd have to be. I don't like it. Say what specifically you think the issue is that preventing you from determining the findings would not be able to be made. And then lastly, there's always the option to request additional information and continue the item to the next meeting agenda, either request additional information of staff or the applicant on a particular issue of concern. So that wraps up the staff report for this item. So as noted in the recommendation, I encourage you to receive a presentation from the applicant, and then after that to open the public hearing and receive public testimony.
We're all in agreement. We want to hear from the applicant. Yep, great.
Please. All right, before you get started, that's me. Bring up. I see.
I
All right.
did plagiarize that off of your website. It was a beautiful photo. I thought I'd use it. Dutch Morrison, I work for Thompson Gas. Been working with Tavis to try and find a suitable place so we can better serve our customers in this area. Thompson Gas is the industry leader in providing service, reliability, and safety in the propane industry across the United States, including Northern California. We have about 13 stores in the Northern California area. Our closest one is in Laytonville, which is about 130 miles away. We seek to install a satellite storage here in Blue Lake just to reduce our carbon footprint and reduce our costs and better serve our customers in this area. I don't know what our total customer base is here. It's growing every week. Okay. So it's still relatively small. We'd like to get storage in here so we can expand our operations. Competition's always a good thing. The more of one service you have, the better it is for the customers. Propane gas is one of the cleanest fossil fuels available. It is one of the only clean energy fossil fuels listed by EPA, the federal infrastructure plan. Going through their infrastructure plan, there's about $5 billion set aside for the use of propane in buses, either in rapid transit or schools. Part of that money is earmarked for specifically the infrastructure to try and get auto gas facilities put in. We're not able to do that yet because we don't have the storage to support that type of industry here. And we have our own auto gas division. And once we get storage in the area, we're going to start pursuing those kind of avenues. Let's see, the California Air Resources Board did their own study, and they found that propane offers lower greenhouse gases than any other fossil fuel option. We are investing in propane powered vehicles ourselves. We have 50 Cummins, propane industry is, and California Air Resources Board to develop an engine that is more efficient to burn propane. Hopefully in the next couple of years that's going to happen. And once that does, we're going to try and transition our entire fleet to strictly propane powered vehicles. It's more economical, the engines last longer, and the greenhouse gas emissions are about 80% less than that of diesel engines. So that's the direction we want to move into. Propane is not ground pollutants. Can't spill it on the ground. It's not going to contaminate anything. Thompson Gas, is huge in California. Air Resources Board doing a lot of things to limit greenhouse gases. Just All right, the following impact of local economy from this project. We're providing a few additional jobs. We started out with 2 employees here. We're up to 3 now. Sam started out with us as a driver. We promoted him into more of an HR position to recruit drivers for us. Um, so, so, the slides here is it's an auto gas station, and this is kind of what I believe that's a ours look like that. It's on skids. It's got a lower profile. This is at a school bus facility. I forget the location. We have one in Plumas County that looks just like this, but I don't know if that's the location. Plumas County is over by um, or trying to do the same thing as everybody around here is, I'm sure. The next is just the picture of the plot plan of B&B. Will be on the southern end of that, where the trees are. Yeah, yeah. Um, the fencing around it, and try and conceal the tank as much as possible. We'll probably either a 6-foot or an 8-foot fence to try and hide it from people walking upon the levee. There are already trees planted along there, but we can add additional foliage if needed. Um, we're going to contain our operations inside of the B&B perimeters. We don't work at night. It's a quiet operation outside of the sound of a vehicle running. There's no other noise pollution, light pollution, or dust. There'll be a couple trips in and out a day through the personal vehicles, and then the bobtails usually make 1 to 2 trips in and out of the site a day. Service trucks could do 3 to maybe 4, just depending upon what their day looks like. Usually they can load up everything that they need for their day's work and just make the 1 trip out. So traffic will be a minimal, no off-street parking will be required. As Gary stated, about California, CEQA, the 15303 class 3, we believe we fit into that for the exemption, the same as 15332, class 32 as the infill development. We feel we fit in with the current business that's there of B&B toilets and the fencing. We went over the traffic. Propane is a safe and reliable source of energy that serves various purposes: heating homes, water, running generators during emergency, and fueling vehicles. Thompson Gas is dedicated to the local communities we serve, providing support to local youth activities, events through donations and sponsorships. That was my presentation. We have a couple of questions. One of them is we will store empty propane tanks there. We listed 50 is a high number. We doubt we'll ever have 50 empty propane tanks there. When the propane tanks come in, they're vacuum purged. They're just a metal cylinder until we put propane in them.
And if I could point out, what you're referring to, questions received this afternoon from Council Watts, responding to those questions.
Yeah, they're just a metal vessel until we put the um, bring- um, DOT laws, we can't haul those tanks with more than 5% in them. We usually transfer them into a bobtail at the customer's location. And once they get back to the yards, we pump the additional 5% out so that there's just vapor in the tanks. If we're doing things right, we don't bring tanks back to the yard. Just take them and put them in customer location. The other question is FTA 50-foot setbacks from property lines. Those setbacks are met at that site. It's 65 on 65. Close to 80 feet. So we're well within those limits. If, let's see what's here. Thinking about that's actually the third fire marshal. If that's something that we request, then it would definitely we would have to do. Let's see the other question. Although, let me just read what he said. Although there may be empty or full 30 propane tanks at the Blue Lake Power, and the question would be safety concerns for both tanks the same. Yes. Anything over 4,000 gallons all has the same setbacks until you get up over 100,000 gallons of storage, and that's the 50-foot requirements. Do either of them have explosive or in addition to plant involved barrier? Okay, that would be something.
I believe. In addition to the president, yeah, with staff report, they're just sure the 30,000 gallon tank, on campus. That's
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Let's open it up for any public comment. Receive any public testimony. Any people interested in speaking?
what's that?
Any hand up? Looks like there's a. Yeah.
Is that me again, Bob?
That's
Go
you
ahead.
again.
Yes, this is Julie Christian speaking again. I'm glad I kept some notes while we talked because I'm going to the best real quick. But I would like to say that I really highly support local businesses supporting local businesses. I think that should be a huge priority in certain times. And I would assume, although at this point with the project needs attention, it's been a year at least I've seen it be on an agenda item. We've had some meetings, and I just really want to say I do promote like clean safe goals, converting this ideology kind of into a larger picture that supports our economy and infrastructure. I just want to say it should be just another conversation. I appreciate comments on it, but that's a real big thing that everybody should pay attention to. and supervise meetings and everything that's going forward in the county outside of our local area. This particular project, though, I want to say really does support our team plan as it's played out for our industrial park. And in the original proposition, the OSPO that we've gone through, this type of project is what was projected to happen. So my question to commission and staff would be, will this project have a potential conflict with the proposed potential recreational residential to come? I just asked because sites in comparison are not located in as much close proximity. And I just, I think we should just think ahead with our, again, the people, the comment I mentioned, just an extra plan. I just want to make sure these guys get invested. They're not going to have any headaches going forward. I do support their project, but I don't support them having conflicts of interest as we move forward with it. It's a huge investment. So thank you for my time, speaker. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I had a hard time getting all that to
It was,
be nice.
it was difficult. Do you have any questions? For that?
I mean,
Oh, hold on. If there's nobody else who wants to speak, then
I just meant directly to Kristen.
Oh.
it was just a little hard for me to unpack all of it.
so you want to ask for clarification.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how we can really remedy that.
Is there a particular?
Yeah, I
is there
heard something about
specific-
I heard something about concerns about conflict with the ozone, and then there's a lot of details missing. So
Yeah, I did catch that as well. It's one of the things I wrote down. I think she was asking if this project would conflict with other future uses proposed or considered for the district.
Yeah. Yeah, my gist of it was that she was supportive of the business and that it fit perfectly for what we have and have been doing, but in concern with what has been proposed in the future, that there could be some potential conflict.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what she was thinking.
All right, any other public comment?
Denise Stefani Blue Lake. Yeah, just kind of want to second what Julie said. As we understand it, just the question about potential conflict as we go forward with the changing of the ozone, and the uses that are going to be promoted in that area. So hopefully you'll discuss that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, close the hearing for the public comment period, and now it's time to discuss this.
Are you looking at me?
Looking all over, looking around the table. Yeah. Um, does anyone have any comments, statements, questions?
Pretty much negate any future. So. Unless. If.
Yeah, and I don't. I just kind of think like industrial use it with no high dust in the ton. So let's say there were used of Jason properties. I think it was major conflicts. Now, I think it was last projects. So the only way that could be a concern if there were federal funding, see like HUD, if they're going to use Section 8 funding, things like profit-based vouchers or that type. You have to do an analysis under the National Environmental Policy Act. And that analysis, you have to consider above ground storage. This big load that nature, but they still making plant And 30,000 gallon tanks have about a separation distance when you do the HUD analysis, about 1,100 feet. You have to separation from the tank. So there's an analysis you can do to figure out what are good mitigation options for that. So sometimes they'll put, just a concrete masonry unit wall along the boundary of the site. And really, that's the tank and things like that. There's upper story facing it, things like that. So, kind of so anyway, that's one of the considerations. Always there was something to do. It's just going to add more money to the project. Or the folks on this property to put out. Anyway, that's the one. Funding. Now there's a community project supposed to be an affordable housing project. The distance, I believe, is over the required separation distances. Issue that up.
Another question, in terms of that variance, with the site plan, the way it's designed, is that a
It's the developer doing the affordable housing project off their site.
okay?
Because it's hard to get people sometimes to agree to be willing to put that on their property. Right? So that's where I've seen it typically done off site at the site of the affordable housing.
So,
Thank you for putting together a really good a couple of questions that I'm concerned about is this slight it's all concerned about direction. And I'd like the planning commission to discuss that. Primarily the view shed from the trail, because the proposed fencing is not going to shield anything from the trail because of the elevation of the trail. You look right over it down on the tanks. And then any future development with things we've heard about, such as the campground or anything like that, which is immediately adjacent to it. I think that we just need to think about that and take those things into consideration. And both of those comments come back to is we keep seeing projects come through under the categorical exemption, and I think in my mind we're to the point now where we need to start looking, or at least considering, a cumulative impacts report for all of these projects, because when they all start coming to fruition, there is going to be potential cumulative impacts. And so it's just something for consideration and something for discussion. And so that's kind of where I'm sitting with it.
Is there like a general guideline that we have for certain square footage of development where after a certain amount of these exemptions that we do trigger that, or is that just something that we're doing ad hoc at the moment?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think we're doing it ad hoc, and that's my concern, is that while individually all these projects do meet that, myself personally, I think that it's time to start talking about evaluating the impacts combined. So I guess that's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah, right. But you're asking for a response and either
Yeah.
support or criticism or whatnot.
I mean, we obviously have options on the table, right? 3 of them. I mean, we could, request staff to address that with us and discuss that with us, which would mean that we would table it to a future meeting. And we've got those 3 options. I don't personally, I don't think that there's any reason for denial.
Right.
I think that approval is possible, but I'm just proposing that third option is maybe we need to start looking at it in a different way.
I kind of want to tag along to that and comment with that because while I was going through this and researching it, I did struggle finding other, municipalities that had guidelines for what crossed over to the threshold as a significant hazardous material. I mean, propane is a hazardous material as is classified by OSHA. Um, but I did find at least one instance where a planning commission had outlined a threshold for propane, and I mean, 10,000 pounds is what it listed, but it does make me curious at what point with this project and any other projects too, where do we cross the threshold into what is significant, what is the cumulative impact to the area?
Is there any comment by the staff that you'd like to make about this?
Sure. I could kind of go back to the fact that this area was designed as an industrial park
Right.
and operated as one for years. Way more truck traffic, way more noise, way more issues, large propane tank at Blue Lake Power. So, what we've done with the opportunity zone is essentially say, the community doesn't want that anymore. So we're going to go the direction of less impactful development. The city had already analyzed that as an industrial park, put the infrastructure in, address cumulative impacts of all that industrial development. There used to be a mill site there. So really the direction we're going is not more impactful, it's less. And I've emphasized that many times at public hearings and town hall meetings, and I truly believe that. I believe this is a better direction than where the city was previously going with all that industrial development. From a CEQA perspective, I wouldn't say we're doing this ad hoc or inappropriately in any way. It's totally legitimate to use these categorical exemptions. If you meet the criteria, you fit under the thresholds, which this project absolutely does. This is very limited development, very limited traffic, very little potential for impacts. So relative to the historic industrial activity, adding this onto this site, it's minimal. I don't see the potential for a cumulatively considerable contribution to a cumulative impact. This is going to be a minimal contribution. Now, some of the other future projects, like the Bottawat Community Project, which is being considered, the city will be preparing an initial study for that project, and that does require a consideration of cumulative impacts, which will address the other reasonably foreseeable projects down there. Reasonably foreseeable typically means they have plans, they submit an application. It's not things that could possibly happen in the future. The RV park is not currently reasonably foreseeable. It's not zoned right. It would need, to be investigated for potential hazardous materials. You'd actually need to find somebody that wanted to build it. There's a lot of actions that would need to take place before that would be considered a viable project and a reasonably foreseeable project. So really right now, the ones we're looking at are the Bottawat Community Project, the Rousseaus, who are proposing that additional building, and then there's consideration of developing the courtyard and the property north of Paradise K. I think they're interested in doing that. So we've had a traffic study that was done that considered all four of those projects. Traffic was probably one of the main concerns that was brought up at town hall meetings and public hearings in regards to development down there. That's why we had a cumulative analysis done. A lot of the other potential impacts are appropriately analyzed on a site-specific basis. There's things that they're really only going to affect that site, and you don't need to try and add those things together for a cumulative impact analysis. But we will be addressing potential cumulative impacts of those four projects in the initial study for the Bottawat Community Project. So personally, for me, I don't see this project as really having any major contribution to significant cumulative impacts that could happen down there from future development in the Powers Creek District.
Okay, thank you.
So, out of curiosity, Gary, what's the harm in going through the process?
For
I
this
mean,
project?
you're using words like personally,
Yeah.
right? And we have a community that is, somewhat dependent on us, going not just going through the motions, but demonstrating that those things are occurring. And so I'm a little,
Yeah.
with my background in engineering and survey, I'm a little hesitant when I hear words like personally.
Yeah. Well, I probably
And
should have said in my professional opinion, but that's what came
that
out
would
of
have
my
been
mouth
awesome.
at the time.
Yes. So it's just if it's such an easy pass, then why not go through the motion?
Well, what that would result in would basically be us to come back at the next meeting with a short write-up on a cumulative impact analysis. I think there's enough information in the record right now for you to already make that determination, but if you want to see it in writing, we can do that.
Any other thoughts about this?
In my mind, this is a pretty small, it is infill development. Like if we were to do a more of a cumulative impact, I wouldn't be in favor of doing that for something like just the addition of a 30,000 gallon propane tank, given what's already occurring on that site, and the surrounding sites. I mean, we have a dilapidated power plant next door. We have porta potties and storage containers and, you know, a variety of consistent uses that exist. And so, I do definitely understand the need for more of a comprehensive like plan for that area. And also we are always going to be, well, not always, but for the foreseeable future, dealing with sort of a mixture of uses where we're trying to shift into this opportunity zone. Yet we have existing businesses there that want to do, you know, these minor improvements and additions. And yet we're wanting to bring different types of development and kind of re-envision that zone. And so I do see us always, not always, but for the foreseeable future, having these sorts of issues as we move forward in that. But in terms of a 30,000 gallon propane tank, I don't see the need to do any more comprehensive studies. This was a lot of information.
Yeah, it was very well.
Yeah, it was very well put together. And so I'm comfortable moving forward. With the option one here, the approval, you know, they do have to get the building official and building permits, and there were some conditions of approval that I'd be comfortable moving forward with.
Anything to add, Matt?
No, I do think it's not really an issue with this so much, but I do agree as a general issue that we may want to discuss at a later time. Just cumulative impact reports and establishing some framework so that we have just a general guideline to go by saying, you know, this many square feet have been developed in the past couple of years. This needs to happen, or just a time trigger where it's like we haven't had a report in the past 4 years, you know, just establishing those benchmarks so that they're in place. So it's not a matter of, oh, I think we need it or I don't. It's a lot easier if you just have hard guidelines, but that's not, I don't think that specifically applies to this one here. I think it's a separate issue.
Okay.
I'd have to agree with Matt. Ultimately, my only question right now is I saw that the Blue Lake Fire Department provided comment and input, but would the fire marshal also be providing input, or would they be inspecting the site afterwards?
So I believe the fire marshal is Ed Laidlaw,
Mhm.
who contracts with Blue Lake Fire District. He's really the one who conducts those reviews because he has the expertise to do so. So that's who provided those comments.
Okay.
And yes, there'd be potential inspections to make sure that these requirements are actually met. That would occur through the building permit process.
Gotcha. Yeah, ultimately, I went through this. I tried to objectively see if there's anything with an issue with the CEQA and the exemptions, and I just couldn't find anything. I'm totally comfortable with moving forward on it. I do see the concern about cumulative impacts, but I just didn't see it with this one in particular. I just see it further on forecasted down the line. One thing I did find is that what is termed as significant for impacts to the environment for CEQA is that municipalities have to adopt their thresholds. So anything that we need to point to and say, hey, this is significant or not, it seems like the city would need to adopt those thresholds for us to be able to.
Well, yes and no. Rural communities typically don't adopt, or smaller communities often don't adopt their own thresholds. They will use thresholds from other communities, and they have to provide substantial evidence to why that's an appropriate threshold in this situation. So that's typically what you'll see around here, because not many of the jurisdictions have adopted thresholds of significance specific to every resource category you'll find in, say, an initial study.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
It's good to know. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. Like, just if you just straight look at the CEQA, it's all above board. It's all there, and I don't think there's any issues there. We've just seen a lot of these, so.
Yeah, and I just call attention again to our recommendation for a 5-year permit term, one that aligns with the
Yeah.
lease, but also the idea that, yeah, this area's been rezoned for mixed use, not necessarily this specific type of use. So it's going to take a while before any development happens down there. These are, you know, those are a lot of money and effort has to go into doing development on sites like that. So I don't, in my mind, see that, you know, in 5 years, it's going to be surrounded by development. It's going to be inconsistent in some manner. But 5 years, it's their lease term and gives the
Mhm.
city and the planning commission the opportunity to revisit this at a later time and determine whether it still is an appropriate use for the site.
Yeah, so you use that term finite 5 year, which
Yeah.
we've seen these 5 year things before, but I've never heard it with the finite. And so
The
is there
reason
a
I say
distinction
that,
there or
the reason I say that is because a conditional use permit, unless specified otherwise, runs with the land. So it's indefinite.
Oh,
Mhm.
Here
Okay.
we're specifying a 5-year permit term, and I just referred to it as a finite permit.
Okay.
that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, are we ready for a motion?
Yes. I'll motion to adopt resolution number 3-2023, read by title only. A resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Blue Lake approving a conditional use permit and site plan approval for Thompson Gas LLC to allow operation of an outdoor propane storage and distribution business in the Opportunity Zone.
All right, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all right. Any discussion, or have we covered that?
Good.
Okay. All those in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for putting together a good packet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Give a hard time.
Okay. Let's see. Number 5,
Okay, so let's look at the plan.
amendment to the Blue Lake General Plan housing element for the 6th planning cycle, 2019-2027. Review of the 9/20/23 determination letter from the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. Gary,
Yeah, let me just get my paper situated.
get things
here.
together. Yeah, from one thing to the next. Am I going too fast? Sorry.
Not at all. Not at all. Just want to be organized. Okay. So, this item is really on here to provide an update on the process for the housing element update for the City of Blue Lake for the 6th planning cycle. I gave kind of an overview of what the process has been so far in here. We've had several years using funding from the local early action planning grant program to prepare an update of the city's housing element. And it's a tough process nowadays. You often have to submit multiple drafts to the agency before you get to a point where they're willing to say yes, you're in compliance with state law. It's been uniquely interesting for Blue Lake just because Blue Lake hasn't had a certified housing element in either the 4th or the 5th cycle, which goes back to 2009, basically. The last time it was certified was in 2004, and that went to 2009. So there's some unique things to Blue Lake that don't apply to a lot of other jurisdictions in the state that actually did do that planning and did get a certified housing element. And in their comments, so basically we submitted for a 60-day formal review. That's typically kind of the last review you do where they tell you, okay, these are the last things you need to do, or, we're good, you're in compliance. Well, we didn't get you're totally in compliance letter. We got you've done most of what we've asked, but because you didn't
Thank
plan,
you.
yeah, but because you didn't plan for your arena allocation in the prior cycle, you now have to
Yeah.
plan for it in this cycle. And in order to do that, you need to implement Program 14, which is the rezoning and by right procedure for multifamily development. The next item on the agenda tonight relates to this issue and the residential high density combining zone that's proposed by Program 14. Essentially, what we're saying is that we're going to create this combining zone and then we're going to apply it to individual properties in the city. And just to remind the public and the commission, the reason we're doing that is because the planning commission and council were never comfortable picking an entire zone and saying, sure, we're going to allow by right multifamily development in that zone. So we tried to take a more surgical approach where we said, fine, let us create a combining zone that we can apply on an individual property basis. And we're like, this is our arena allocation for the 7th cycle, for example. Cool, RHD combining zone. We just met our arena allocation. That was kind of the idea. So anyway, I've been looking through these code sections that they reference in here, and I'm really trying to wrap my head around it about exactly what's required here, because I'm not totally certain it is Program 14. That's something we're ultimately proposing, but I'd like to get more information from them. So I'm crafting basically, an email or letter to HCD to say, here's my read of this code section, but what you stated in the letter went a little beyond that text, that language at face value, and I'd like to understand that better, and I'd like to find the most efficient way to meet this requirement so that the city isn't spending unnecessary dollars to become compliant with their housing element. So that's kind of the track we're on now. Um, other than figuring out how to implement this requirement for rezoning, they also said we basically have to take the sites inventory that we had in the element and put it in their forms. They wanted to be done exactly a certain way. Now everybody has to do that, and people don't do that as part of their element. They do that after. They're asked to do it at the end, and so that's what they're asking us to do now. So those are the two things. Otherwise, we have done the lion's share of work that needs to be done. Um, so we can at this point take this through the adoption process with the idea that to actually be compliant, we have to implement one of these programs. So that there is going to be a CEQA initial study that's prepared for this that will be brought back to you guys. It needs to be circulated for 30 days, and we're going to be analyzing all the programs because that's really the project description of the housing element. That's the thing that the city is committing to. Otherwise, everything else is analysis and inventory of vacant sites, things like that. But it really all leads to what are the programs you're committing to during the planning period. And as we noted, program 14 is one of those. So the initial study will analyze all those programs. We need to complete that, and then we would bring it back to the Planning Commission for public hearings to review this and make a recommendation to the City Council. The City Council would take the final action on this date. So I do believe I outlined the remaining steps in the process here. Starting with what I just said, finalizing the CEQA initial study and circulating for 30 days. Completing the adoption process with both the Planning Commission and City Council, including public hearings. Planning Commission make the recommendation to the Council. Council takes final action. We need to implement Program 14 or something similar in nature that will accomplish what they're asking us to accomplish, what's required by those code sections they referenced. And then ultimately we would submit the adopted housing elements and that electronic sites inventory and any ordinance for any sort of rezoning action we took that's either implementing Program 14 or something similar. So that's what we have left to do. It'll be several additional months of work. We're hoping to accomplish this by maybe the end of the first quarter of next year, something like that. But that's where we're at this time. So the recommendation for this item was to receive a presentation from staff, and I encourage you to open this item up for public comment.
All right, thank you. And let's do that. Let's open this for public comment. What kind of foods?
Hello, my name is Lisa Hoover, Blue Lake. First, I want to thank those for bringing up cumulative effects, one of my major themes in a lot of things. So thank you, commissioners, for bringing that up and giving that consideration for the future. Thank you very much. In regards to this item, and again, Gary, it might be that I just didn't, your bullet statements here, the 3 items here, I may not, and it may not be interpreting them correctly, but as to the next steps that you mentioned, the 3 bullet items, as stated, public hearings are listed as a component of completing the adoption process. But it does not clearly account for the public engagement, the public notice in review and potentially refining the areas proposed to be rezoned. To the contrary, it almost looks like the engagement of the public comes after the city has determined which property the residential high density combining zone applies. Completion of the housing element update needs to engage the public regarding properties potentially subject to this new zoning prior to the city determining where the zoning applies. And again, this has to do with how I'm interpreting the 3 bullets. I would ask that the steps that were presented above, and that's in the information you sent to the public, be reordered to and make sure that we include public engagement earlier in the process prior to the city making a determination about which properties would be rezoned. Because as it's presented here, the 3 bullets, it's kind of like, yeah, we'll involve the public, but you've already determined. And so that the public will have some input into maybe shifting how those happen and where they occur, because I've never seen a map of where this is supposed to happen. And then the other item, which is kind of, the intro to the housing element does talk about general plan consistency. And I think it's come up at other meetings, not I think, I know it has. So, and I think the interpretation is that this zoning change suggestion is consistent with the general plan. And I'd like, if possible, if that can be detailed out a little bit more, because I know our general plan is out of date. It's not been updated. So I just wanted to, if it is consistent, could that be detailed? So kind of two items here. One has to do with the steps and the order of things and making sure the public, before the determination of what happens and where these lots are located, I think that's very important for us to know about that prior to just moving ahead on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then Julie.
Okay, I think she's good to go.
Thank, thank you again. Can everybody in the room hear me okay?
Yep.
I'll try and speak a little slower this time, clearer. Um, I'm understanding, this item's a discussion. I've been keeping up with the Arcata Planning Commission and the council, thanks to Humboldt Access, or Access Humboldt. And they have gone through a lot more extensive process with dating their housing element, incorporating the gateway plan, because they are adhering to being consistent with their general plan. And I know we've had some dialogue in the past that updating our general plan could be in excess of funds quoted at 1 million at the town hall. But I think if we could just facilitate down to the specific items that are in confliction or in discernment with public, that we could start doing the same special meeting process that potentially Arcata has drifted out. Arcata1.com is great access for kind of what's been going on there. And I guess a question for the commission back to staff. I'm looking at familiar with the zoning of what type of scheme is that's trying to be adopted into the housing element. Here, like you said, it's something that kind of throw at us. They felt like it was a new item as well. And I'm not really like familiar with the think about going like extending a township kind of a tight map to put things back to us at the next owner. Thank you.
Is there public comment?
I would just like to further support Lisa Hoover's comment about public engagement and encourage the commission to consider giving the public a means to really participate in the process. I hear from a lot of people that they feel like they come to meetings, they make comments, or they write in with comments, and it seems like those comments are not part of the process. I mean, they're part of the hearings, they're part of the meetings because they get rolled into the process here, but people I'm sensing are not feeling heard and feel that their contributions are not becoming a part of these housing element updates. So I just want to encourage the commission to the degree that it's possible to include the public as much as we're able to. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Close it for public testimony and then any other discussion among us about how to move forward.
Gary, I was wondering if you could just in reference to one of the comments we got, just do a very brief, I know you're always very thorough and detailed, but brief summary of in the draft housing element, there were different programs that were things that we could implement. And so could you kind of talk about that in general and then maybe highlight a little bit about why this program 14 is kind of focus or why that's our priority
Yeah.
for clarification.
So yeah, I'm not sure the exact number of programs that
There were
are
a lot,
proposed
yeah.
in there. It's 20 something, but they address all sorts of different issues. But mostly what they address is the city doing things to lower the barriers to providing housing for all income levels. But most importantly, specific to Blue Lake zoning code amendments, some of which are relatively minor, but there's just so many inconsistencies with state law and the city's code. And they brought that up in their comments and they said, you need to address this, you need to address that. So a lot of the things that actually are requiring the city to amend their rules, are things that are basically because of inconsistencies in state housing law. So to be honest, the city really doesn't have a choice on some of these things. You either comply with state housing law or there's consequences. And we've held a lot of public hearings. We've held 2 town hall meetings where we presented on these materials. And I think the problem with some of the comments is they were essentially contrary to what the city council has directed staff to do, which is to become compliant with state housing law. There's been a lot of comments saying, it's not an appropriate level of growth and things like that. There's going to be various impacts and things. So some of what's been requested would probably result in the city not being able to achieve compliance with state housing law, and that's not the directive that the majority of the council has given us. But we have the housing element available at City Hall and on the city's website. Folks can look through all those programs. That's what we're going to be analyzing in the initial study. A lot of them are kind of benign, and it's just like, we're going to distribute information about the Fair Housing Act, or we're going to work with local groups, to work with homeless folks or find resources, work with the Community Resource Center here and things like that. But like I noted, the most important ones are things that are committing the city to changing its rules to be compliant with state housing law. One of those things is this RHD combining zone in program 14. And that's really been a huge sticking point between the state and the city for years, this by right zoning requirement. Right now, I don't think you can do multifamily. If you're doing 5 or more units, you need a CUP in Blue Lake, and the state's like, so we've really tried to take this targeted approach with the RHD combining zone, where when we create that zone and apply it to a single property, that will be the only property that has that by right zoning in the city, versus picking the R3 zone or the mixed use zone or the opportunity zone. Now, that combining zone may be overlaid on a single property in one of those zones, but it would never apply to the entire zone and all the properties within that zone. So we've really tried to minimize what the city's committing to with the by right zoning requirements. Beyond that, is there anything else you would like me to cover?
No, that's
That
great.
was good.
Well, and that's a luxury that we really have to make that choice to, put that on top of another zone instead of applying it to a whole zone. Right? That
Sure.
allows us to have control over where we want to see that and where the public wants to see it.
That is an example of local control that the state is still allowing. So, they're not going to tell you exactly where you need to, allow multifamily housing unless you just say, forget it, we're not planning for this. And then they'll come in and they'll say, okay, Housing Accountability Act, these various other rules.
Well, we know there's
apply.
consequences.
Yeah.
It's happened locally to other
Yeah.
cities here.
And each year they're passing new legislation that is eroding local control. But at this point, the city of Blue Lake, like all the other jurisdictions in the state, still have the ability to develop a compliant housing element where they decide where, the higher density development is going to happen in their community. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with the RHD combining zone. And really what that zone would do is I'm trying to propose it as a minimum maximum as far as density. We worked this out with the Planning Commission over the last several years, but the minimum you would need to allow in by right zoning is 16 units per acre. They've determined that that is suitable for affordable housing in lesser developed areas in the state. I think it's 25 in the urban areas. So our conversation with the Planning Commission was like, okay, if that's the minimum, it could also be the maximum. So, obviously we need to run that by HCD and make sure they're completely on board with that. They have reviewed the language twice and they've made a few tweaks and things, but it's not till you really get to that final point and, get in writing that they think it's adequate what we're attempting to do. But anyway. And the next item, I think some of the things that were brought up, we'll be addressing under agenda item 6 because that's where we're getting into a little more on the RHD combining zone.
Anything else? Good. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Number 6, amendment of the Blue Lake Municipal Code to include the residential high density RHD combining zone and the zoning map amendment to apply the combining zone property in the city. This amendment would implement program HI 14 in the Blue Lake General Plan housing element update for the 6th planning cycle 2019 to 2027.
All right. So yeah, we'll just go into it. So basically kind of gave an overview in the staff report of the fact that the Planning Commission met in 2021 and 2022 to review this proposed draft combining zone. To address people's comments about the public not being aware of sites and things like that, I have given examples of potential sites that this could be applied to, but no decisions have been made at all. The Planning Commission has talked about potential sites. It needs to be a site that's 1 acre or larger. So let's just start with that. That's the state's requirements so that that site could accommodate the minimum of 16 units per acre. At past town hall meetings, I put up slides that she used the Calgon Carbon site as an example and said, okay, here's a 2 acre site in the opportunity zone that could have the RHD combining zone applied to it. It's about a 2 acre site, so you could have 32 units on that site. So other than that, the Calgon Carbon site's probably not one they would accept for this rezoning action because it's developed. I know it's not operational, but it's developed.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot to convince HCD that somebody's going to buy it, is going to demolish all of that and fix it up to develop for housing. The justification and the analysis you have to provide to explain that, it's too much. And we probably aren't going to convince them. So the point being is they want it applied to a vacant site.
Yeah.
So where are vacant sites that large in the city? Well, there's some in the Powers Creek district. There are some that are almost vacant here along South Railroad, but as we noted in the housing element, it's a substandard road. There's limited infrastructure, maybe not the best site for that type of thing. So probably some of the vacant areas north of Taylor Way would probably be an appropriate location. Now, it's not being considered for the site that the Bottawa Community Project is being considered for, but it may be somewhere in that vicinity or adjacent to it where we could apply this to a 1 acre area and meet this by right zoning requirement. But as I noted before, I still think there's some more discussion that needs to be had with HCD about what exactly we need to do. It may not be implementing this program. It may be something similar in nature. But other than that, let's see. So I kind of lay out here what the next steps would be to move forward on this item. And this is in fact what we would need to do. So basically sending the RHD combining zone to HCD for final review before we take it through the adoption process. We don't want to expend city resources before we know this is going to meet this requirement. Determining which property in the city to apply this to, and then we would prepare mapping illustrating the proposed zoning map amendment. That would be available for the public to review. It would be presented and discussed at public hearings before the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council. And then completing the adoption process with the Planning Commission City Council. Most likely the CEQA document prepared for the housing element would be the document that would be used for the CEQA determination for this action. And as I noted, we'd go to the Planning Commission first and the City Council for final action. So there's, for this as well, a several month process that would need to occur before either the Planning Commission or City Council could take action on this item. So I would note that I have the current version that's been worked out by the Planning Commission, and some comments from HCD were incorporated into this as well. And just to show you what this would be as far as a code amendment in the city's municipal code, there is a section on regulations for the combining of zones and for open space lands. The city has a density combining zone in there as an example of another combining zone type. There's a historic overlay combining zone. So there's a couple other combining zone tools that already exist in the municipal code. we would just be adding this one also to meet the by right zoning requirement that HCD and the state require to comply with state housing law. So it's relatively straightforward. Basically, it just says that in addition to the regulations set forth for the property, they would be modified by applying this combining zone. And then it lays out what that means. So we're saying here that it's intended to be combined with the residential multiple family, the city's kind of standard high density multifamily zone, the mixed use zone, which is the area around the downtown, the opportunity zone, which is Powers Creek District, and or the planned development residential zone, which is a lot of this land west of City Hall and down South Railroad. So then it gets into kind of the criteria for it. So applicability, as I noted, applying those zones I just mentioned, and you'd follow the rules in here in lieu of any other requirements in those zones that may be conflicting. The density, maximum of 16 dwelling units per acre. And we just state that. I probably would need to do it as a minimum maximum, and that's something I need to discuss with HCD. Other than that, they had a requirement in here that they added about a minimum of 50% of the square footage in a mixed use development shall be residential. So they don't want this being applied and then somebody's like, nah, I'm just going to do commercial, like, so it also notes in here that a development would not be precluded from providing 100% residential square footage. So, for example, if this were applied to a site in the opportunity zone, they're saying you can't stop them from doing 100% residential. That's basically what it's saying. And then, identifying no discretionary review required. That's the whole point of this, is for by right zoning. And that means, no use permit, no site plan approval. And then lastly, design standards. So oftentimes when communities do these by right zoning actions, they create objective design standards because they understand that there's going to be no discretionary review after you adopt this on that property for multifamily at 16 units per acre. They can just get a building permit, So that's why the design standards also matter. They have to be objective though. They cannot be like those site plan approval principles to be followed, which say things like, consistent with the character of the community or adjacent development. That's considered a subjective design standard, which is unenforceable under state law when it comes to these type of housing projects that would fit in this zone. So anyway, that's an overview of what the current draft of this RHD combining zone is. And that was an overview of the general process the city would need to go through. Still, as I noted, I want to have further discussions with HCD because I'm not totally convinced at this point that this is the only option the city has for meeting this requirement. So anyway, that concludes my staff report.
Thank you. And I'll open it to public testimony. Any public comments? Yes.
Lisa Hoover again. My previous comments were actually for this item, probably more than they were, if that makes sense. I was actually looking at the bulleted statements that he just read, and I still would like to know at what point will there be a meeting to show which properties are going to be considered for this zoning? What stage of the steps or what phase is that going to happen? Because that's the fundamental question I asked in my last comment. So I don't know if that can be answered. At what point will there be a meeting to show the properties and receive public input on engagement on how those properties are being zoned, and if they are have maybe some opportunity to maybe change it? I don't know, just public engagement in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Lise?
So I was listening to Gary explain that and how it wasn't going to be applied to the Bottawat site. I think I might understand some of the reasons why it wouldn't be, but I just wondered if we might understand a little bit better why it's not appropriate for that site.
Any other comments?
Looks like there's a hand up.
Oh, there sure is. Julie. Thank you.
Yes, everybody, thank you. This is Julie again. I just would love to concur with our prior speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, I will close the public testimony. Now it's our turn.
I guess I had a question regarding the 1 acre minimum. Previously, we'd been able to, parcel stuff out. There's not an ability to get, say, 2 half-acre properties at a density of 8 and say, hey, these two combined equal 1 acre at this. If there's no longer that discretion. It's literally you have to have a property of this size.
Yeah. That's
Is
what
there a
we've been
reason?
told.
And there's not a
Yeah.
specific reason for that. It's just
The reason it's required by state statute to do 1 acre or larger sites. Yeah. So that's what they basically told us. Of course, we can revisit that when I discuss with them and say, well, what if we wanted to do it on a few smaller sites or something like that?
as long as we're meeting the same
Yeah.
ratio, I couldn't see a reason why that wouldn't be applicable, especially because in a community like this, we don't have an excess of 1 acre sites.
Sure.
Kind of limits our ability to pick and choose.
Well, and those of you guys that have been here for a while may remember, we didn't add that language.
No.
These were
Yeah.
comments from
Yeah.
HCD
Yeah.
that said, no, it needs to be for a site 1 acre larger. And the commission, I think Rick Platts was on at the time. He said, why?
Yeah.
Go back to him and ask, well, what if we want to do a couple sites that add up to an acre and you get the same amount of housing? And they were like, no, the statute requires blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I can absolutely revisit that with them again because there's multiple ways you can slice this, but I would like a written determination from them as to why.
Way
And I
too
can,
creative, Perry.
what's that?
Way too
Okay.
creative.
I can bring that back to the planning
It'd
commission.
be nice to have an actual reason for why it can't be the same density over the same area. Two sets across the street from each other. If they're on two separate properties, I don't see why
They're
that would
across
be different.
town from each other. It's
Yeah.
the same amount of housing.
It's totally
Right.
logical, but not everything in state housing policy.
I imagine it's a developer perspective that you're going in with a larger piece.
It's a
and
cost
you
barrier.
you can go and do it on that one spot instead of hoping that it's going to happen in a variety of spots.
Well, I do remember they're saying, they have the idea that a certain amount of density on a certain area site, is conducive to multifamily or affordable housing. And they believe that minimum density is 16 units per acre in the lesser developed areas of the state, 25 units in more urbanized areas. So that was some of the reasoning they gave. The state legislature has determined that, it needs to be at this density, type thing. And they were just trying to keep it simple, I think, and be like, you need to meet that density on a 1 acre site. But of course, I can ask that question again.
My next question would be, how many 1 acre sites do we have in the city?
Right,
Yeah.
we did that inventory, and isn't
Yeah.
that some reasoning you can use with them? We only identify because you did that whole adequate sites inventory and
Yeah.
analysis of vacant and
We have all those
underutilized.
maps and all that.
Sometimes when you ask questions like that,
Yes.
you get don't want
Trouble.
So, things they may say is, well, you could merge lots, you could annex, they often will throw out a bunch of scenarios in which, you could
Okay.
meet that requirement.
Yeah.
And so that can be a little frustrating sometimes.
Yeah.
but-
Careful about the questions you ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I will revisit that question with them and have an answer for you guys at the next meeting.
And I had a question. So, to ensure that a minimum of 16 units per acre or per site would be allowed, but that doesn't mean someone couldn't build less, right? This could be applied on a 1 acre parcel, allowed minimum. Well, I guess.
Minimum means minimum.
Minimum.
So they would have to build 16,
gotta do
even
at
if it's
least
not
16, yeah.
financially or not what they want to do. They want a smaller, can't do it.
They don't have to build them.
Well, they don't have, yeah.
Zoning.
Right, and that's a valid point.
And everyone keeps getting this mixed up.
Right.
just-
We just have to
be
zone for it.
We're just planning for it.
Right.
The option needs to be on the table. It doesn't mean it's actually be
Yeah.
developed in that way.
It could be 100% compliant and no one
Yeah.
would build a thing.
But if theoretically someone had a 1 acre parcel and this zone was applied to it, and then they wanted to do some development, are we only going to allow it if it's at least 16 units? Because that's what this zone that's applied on their parcel
Yeah,
says.
it would be law. It would say you have to do
have
this.
to.
You guys wouldn't be able to make the fine. Well, you wouldn't be making any fines. But right. But bottom line is, it wouldn't meet the objective criteria for the zone, and they wouldn't be able to do it. It'd be against the law.
Wait, can you explain that? Since it's a combining zone, like why are you stuck to the 16 minimum?
Because that's
It
what
just
the
gives
zone
But it's
requires.
but it's combined. It's an overlay.
It's an
Yeah.
overlay,
And
right?
that overrides any other density standards in whatever zone you apply it over the top of.
So
And you
so
have
if
to
you
follow
decide
those
to move
rules.
forward, you have to build 16. You can't build 10.
Right, that's what I, yeah,
Mhm.
that's
That's
my
right.
question. I don't get
That's right.
how
Yeah.
can
So
they
that's imposing
mandate
that on the property owner to a certain extent.
Right.
If you choose a
That's
private
interesting.
property, yeah.
Yeah.
So then that
Yeah.
crosses into the like, well, if you are going to build it, you have to build it a certain way.
That's
Not
right.
like it just has to be zoned.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
Are you're positive about that?
yeah,
I mean, you can look at it.
What is our ability to change zones like after the fact? Like, can we, as long as
Then
we're
you're not compliant.
I know I'm saying as long as we remain consistent with those numbers, right? Like, we're not going to change the total number. And say you get a finding back that, you know what, 2 half-acre properties at 8 per is acceptable.
Mhm.
And later we decide that for whatever reason there's a larger development that wants to come in, or there's another, a business that wants to come in somewhere and it's not conducive
Yeah.
the way the properties are arranged. At a later date in time, is it possible for us to amend this so long as we're still compliant and change the location of that designation?
I mean, we can certainly ask them, but I think they would require you to do something comparable or similar.
Yeah.
You could like Huntington Beach was a good example. They did all subzoning and then they got certified and they went back and went, we're going to change that. They got sued. They were the first
yeah.
jurisdiction in the state to get sued by, the attorney general. So, you would have to coordinate and cooperate with them if you were going to adjust something like that. They would have to know what you're doing and sign off on it in order for that to be done properly.
Okay. But it seems like it would be a possibility. It's not that it's set in stone for all time. Like, if an opportunity
Yeah,
comes up later,
I mean,
we can amend it.
rules are dynamic. Nothing's totally set in stone. So if the city finds another way to meet the intent of that requirement, I assume they would work with us.
Except the combining zone meant you could go with either,
right.
so not.
That's what I thought
That's
too.
what I'm
Absolutely not.
wondering.
No, with the combining zone, as it states here, okay, so all uses and regulations of the principal zone or portion thereof shall apply in the combined zone, except insofar as they are modified or augmented by the uses and regulations set forth in the combining zone. It overrides any conflicting rules. Yeah, that's the idea of a combining zone. Yeah. So, like the the density combining zone that exists in the city's municipal code. You have a certain density that's allowed in a zone. You apply that, you can go down to 1 unit per 3,000 square feet. That overrides the density that's in that zone. That's the idea of combining zones.
But you can, but you don't have to. I guess that's why, yeah, you can, but you don't have to.
Well,
You're planning for it, but
yeah, so this is saying a minimum of 50% of the square footage in a mixed-use development should be residential. So they're establishing a parameter there. They're also saying if somebody wanted to do 100% residential, you can't stop them. That language was added.
Yeah.
That language was added by HCD. So if it were mixed use, a minimum of 50% would have to be residential. Yeah. So yeah, read the kind of the criteria here for what's required, closely. Much of these things that were stated in here, such as the 16 dwelling units per acre, the 1 acre larger, the 50% square footage, and a mixed use development being residential, are not precluding 100% residential, were all parts added by HCD in their review of this.
What's the reasoning for capping it at 16, doing it as a min max?
That was something the planning commission liked.
'Cause,
I think
an acre is
yeah.
really large, and 16
Well,
units, it's pretty low density for an acre.
So even though the city's interested and the city council planning commission are interested in getting compliance with state housing law, they don't want to go crazy. So I think what the planning commission was doing is they said, okay, we're just going to meet the bare minimum requirement. And that's where they came up with the minimum maximum idea. It's like, sure, we'll meet the minimum, but we're not going to allow something beyond that. I actually initially proposed something like 16 to 25 units per
Yeah, you
acre
did.
as
Yeah.
the range that could be allowed by right. And the planning commission said, no.
So if someone comes in and proposes more, they would just have to get a CUP.
No, you can't have a CUP in that, right?
Right. So
No, I think you still
basically, for by right, it's minimum maximum 16 is what the
So you're
commission
waiting your
was
by
talking about.
right at 16, but it may not be affordable or feasible to only build 16 units on an acre.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's probably ways that somebody could do more than that with, discretionary permit or something like that. Sure, if they wanted to.
I mean, 'cause I think of like Russo's apartments, like off of Charlton. What was that, like 9 units? It's a really small parcel.
It's 10 units on a
Yeah,
relatively
10. I
small
mean,
parcel.
so I mean,
Yeah.
an acre of land could, hold a much higher density of development
It could, and those are
appropriately.
conversations the commission could have if you guys want to amend some of this. This is just the last draft that was developed based on,
Right.
planning commission and HCD input. So if you decide to change some of this, then obviously we need to have HCD, review it
Too many questions, Mandy.
so anyway, there's a variety of options on the way to do this. We were trying to be creative, and really the idea is that the city just wanted to meet the bare minimum requirement. They didn't want to have any higher density than the state was requiring them to. That was the whole premise. So
And so it sounds like sorry.
Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
It sounds like the general process forward here is you're going to get some clarity on language on this program and
Yeah.
maybe poke around on a few other questions. And then from that, eventually we're going to get a map of potential properties that we
Yeah.
can apply the combining zone to.
Yeah.
And then at that point in time, that'll be obviously in a planning commission meeting, and there'll be public comment for that. And at that point in time, it'll be out for the public. The public can comment on it over the course of potentially a meeting or two. That's sort of the path that you're seeing before a determination would be made, essentially.
Yeah, that's
At our
typically how the
discretion.
city has done the process in the
Yeah.
past. Yeah.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask about, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to ask about the process for identifying the sites, because you've done that inventory. And I know we have obviously the opportunity zone with the vacant land, more vacant, underutilized land is probably where we'd go first. But do we have a sense of if there are any property owners that would be like volunteering to get this applied to their property that could help us meet our RENA?
Well, yeah,
That are in this
let's
plant,
think about that.
these zones.
So as far as the R3 zone, which is one of them that's listed here, I'm not aware of any properties in the R3 zone of this size, so that probably precludes that. As far as the mixed use, yeah, there is a lot that is over an acre, but it's really not suitable for that level of development because of environmental constraints. The opportunity zone in the Powers Creek district, there are some vacant sites owned by the city that this combining zone could be applied to a portion of one of those vacant sites because they are larger than 1 acre. The planned development residential zone along South Railroad here, there's definitely some sites that are greater than 1 acre, and so a small portion of one of those sites could have this applied to an acre portion. As I noted, there's kind of substandard road access and utilities and things like that. So that takes more important consideration when thinking about whether to apply it to a property like that. So really, it's probably the opportunity and the planned development residential zones. And I'll just point out that these areas west of City Hall along South Railroad were really the sites the city's been pointing out for years and saying this is where all our residential development's going to go because they were large sites with a lot of development potential. And now the city's saying, well, yeah, there's those sites, but they have environmental constraints and substandard infrastructure. But our best sites are probably in the Powers Creek district, which, has a road design for industrial truck traffic, has all the utilities stubbed in, all that kind of stuff. The sites have been graded for development, that kind of thing. So it seems like it would probably be more appropriate on a city owned site in the Powers Creek district, specifically where we haven't arrived at that yet.
Yep, makes sense. Anything you want to ask or add?
No, I feel pretty comfortable with it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it then. We move on.
Okay, so my questions, obviously, I'll be asking about the minimum maximum concept, smaller than 1 acre sites. With another question, is there anything you guys can think about that you think would be relevant to ask the state in regards to this?
Yeah, I guess you kind of mentioned don't bring up, I guess, our limited number of sites because they might suggest ways to acquire more that we're not really ready for.
It can be a double-edged sword when you ask some of those questions, but um, it's still a fair question.
Yeah, because that's my biggest concern is just
Yeah.
the limited number of sites and to say you have to choose 1 acre. You can't do smaller allotments. It really does kind of tie our hands.
I mean, that could go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's like, well, can we do smaller 1 acre when we have 3 sites that meet that criteria or something,
Yeah.
you know? Okay.
Well, and would it help if we were encouraging property owners in these zones, like doing special outreach to them to let them know, this is an option. Here's what the process would be if you want to rezone your site and have it be this combining zone. I mean, from HCD's perspective, would that help us show that like we really are trying to plan for this? We're
Yeah.
working with, we've made it, an option for property owners and clarified the process in case they want to apply this.
Yeah, sure,
Does-
sure. It absolutely would. HCD encourages jurisdictions to reach out to developers, property owners, et cetera, to try and help facilitate housing development. So they do encourage that kind of thing. Yeah.
I mean, really our easiest place to do this so is in Power Street.
Right.
We have plenty of property there.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, I guess it wouldn't hurt to contact the Farley family if they're the ones who still own that area over there that's used as horse pasture and just be like, this is a potential option.
There's an
you know?
option.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have what you need,
Yeah.
Gary? Okay.
I do.
All right, number 7, miscellaneous planner items. Do you have anything miscellaneous for it?
I don't. I think we just include that in there in case there's anything, but
Yep,
but
I
I,
know.
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 8, upcoming planning commission meetings for the next 3 months.
Yeah.
November 20th, December 18th, January 15th. Do these work for everyone?
Sam will not be here the 20th.
Okay, so
For November?
yeah.
I will not
Yeah.
be here the 18th.
Okay, so
Okay, so one on the 18th,
Court not on
one on the
November.
20th.
Matt,
I'm
no.
borderline
You'll
on
be here for all of them?
Yeah.
That's correct.
I should be.
Otherwise,
I
the
always
rest
use
of
that.
you guys are okay for those meetings?
Yeah. Think so.
Court not attending the November 20th meeting, and then Matthew not attending the December 18th meeting.
I might
We
not
still
be
have a
here
quorum.
November 20th either, but you would still have a quorum barely.
Okay.
It's not great.
Yeah, we may have just like one application for like a metal roof or something. So it
Oh,
would be a
okay. Pretty simple.
minor agenda.
Okay.
Haven't we amended that yet?
December's
I
the
thought that was a
18th.
discussion forever ago to get rid of that because of
It
the.
was, but each one of those actions requires city resources, and
Okay.
so
Okay.
it's not really
You
that
need to
hard
just
of a
change
process.
the metal roof.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean,
it's
there will
time
be
to
a
do that.
point, some of the programs in the housing element require code
Mhm.
amendments. It wouldn't be that
Right.
hard to just throw that in there.
Yes.
So when we get to that point, we will probably do that. But
Yeah. I mean, I've voiced this many, many times. It's so contrary to where we are today.
Yeah.
It's like you've got
Yeah.
fire hazard and you can put a wood shingle roof on and you can't put a metal roof on.
And they're not rusty corded
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Forever.
Well, we also talked
Although
about the
that-
idea of establishing
Yeah.
criteria because are we talking like, an old school metal tin roof? Or are we talking about some of these really
Standing
nice
seam
metal
metal roof,
roofing
yeah.
products that are out today, So
Sure. Yeah.
probably saying, yeah, you could do them, but,
Right.
so.
Okay. Well, in my position, I can no longer do my favorite motion. So
Motion
there's
to adjourn.
Yes. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Yep.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
I second that.
Okay.
Everyone jump at once.
All right. All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
All right. We're done.